Welcome to Season 6 of the Photo Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Dodd, and I'm the founder of the Photography Ethics Center. Each week, I'll be talking with an accomplished photographer about the ethics of their practice. This episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast is brought to you by Falmouth University, one of the UK's leading creative arts institutions. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that I'm passionate about education, especially education that is accessible. With flexible online learning through Falmouth University, you can study from anywhere, starting in January, May, or September. Join the university that has nurtured the award-winning photographers Justin Carey, who we interviewed in Season 1, and Rehab El-Dalil, who we interviewed in Season 4. Falmouth graduates have been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, and the BBC. If you're passionate about photography and want to refine your practice, Falmouth's specialist photography courses are designed for you. Led by expert academics and industry-savvy tutors, you'll develop your critical thinking and create work that explores powerful themes on a local, national, and international scale. Search Photography at Falmouth to find out more. Today, in episode number 1, we'll be talking with Aida Muluneh about authenticity. Born in Addis Ababa in 1974, Aida Muluneh graduated from Howard University in Washington, D.C., with a degree in communications, majoring in film. Her photography has been widely published and is included in the permanent collections of prestigious institutions, such as the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, among others. Aida received the European Union Prize at the Rencontre Africaine de la Photographie in Mali in 2007, the CRAF International Award of Photography in Italy in 2010, and she was a Catchlight Fellow in San Francisco in 2018. In 2019, Aida became the first Black woman to co-curate the Nobel Peace Prize exhibition and returned the following year as a commissioned artist for the prize. In 2020, she was honored with the Royal Photographic Society Award in Curatorship. As a Canon brand ambassador, Aida is deeply committed to advocating for the development of photography in Africa through her educational programs across the continent. She's the founder of Addis Photo Fest, the Africa Photo Fair, and the Africa Print House. Can we just start with you telling us a little bit about the kind of work that you do?
First of all, my name is Aida Muluneh. I'm a photographer based between Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire. I'm known for my artistic work through my fine art photography, but I started as a photojournalist. But I'm also known for being an advocate of the development of photography in Africa, and more specifically, organizing photography festivals and offering educational opportunities for the photographers that are based in the continent.
That's great. I mean, you've had a really wide-ranging career as well, because from my understanding, you started off in photojournalism. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you talk maybe a little bit about sort of that transition from maybe a photojournalistic way of representing the world into more of an artistic way of representing the world? If you want to, I don't know if that's even a fair distinction, but how do you see that?
I mean, to me, whether you're doing fine art photography or you're doing photojournalism, I mean, the tools are still the same. The concepts are the same for me. It's just how you choose to express what you're trying to communicate. So often when I teach my students, I tell them we are the communicators and we're using this tool to share our stories or, to share our history or our realities and so forth. So from my end, having a photojournalism background was very useful for my fine art practice. I don't teach fine art photography. I actually teach photojournalism because I believe that's the basis of storytelling. And once you've mastered that, then you can go into these other forms of expression. It's, to get the students systemized and to realize that, we live in a day and age where everyone that picks up a camera, I think that they're photographers, but there's actually a lot of work that goes into it. It's just a matter of choice at the end of the day. So I felt that moving into fine art photography was an opportunity for me to explore a different way of, expressing my ideas, my thoughts, what I have seen, an abstraction of the realities that I've experienced and also to really create my own universe.
Absolutely. I mean, I was reading an interview that you gave. I'll have to include the link in the show notes. I was reading about how you describe some of your work in terms of being quite different from maybe what people expect of images from Ethiopia, for example, or from the continent of Africa more broadly. And I wonder, do you feel like the fine art approach, I guess, offers opportunities that you maybe would struggle to find in a more documentary or journalistic practice?
Just to be clear, photographers in Africa have been doing work for a very long time. It's just a matter of opportunities and, having also in the international media, having sort of diversity within discourse. So right now, for most of us in the continent, there's a level of urgency of trying to balance these cliches that we still see going out and the perceptions as well as it relates to what is Africa. And this is why, organizing festivals like Africa Photo Fair or Addis Photo Fest, this becomes a relevant activity, in my opinion, is because it shows the world that there is a talent base. We've been telling our stories, but it's just, broadening our network and also getting the world to see the dynamism of where photography is in the continent, because clearly we have our own visual language. I mean, I can tell you for the US, if you look at photographers' works in the East and those in the West, there's a clear, difference in style, aesthetics, even quality of light and what have you. So for that, it's a way to share with the world a different way of imagining Africa. And every form for me is valid. So I've said this many times. I'm not an elitist when it comes to creativity. I think there's a place for everyone. But what I'm looking at is how do we develop talent to have these diverse perspectives as well. I'm just one view into my own continent. There's many views into it. So these have been sort of the key elements from my end. So moving into fine art is just because as artists, I feel like you have to grow, you have to explore new things, you have to be curious. And on top of that, you have to evolve. So to me, this was just an evolution into like another form. And this is just the path that I've chosen.
Absolutely. I think there's something really interesting that you're describing there about different visual languages. And because I think that sometimes it can feel like in such a globalized society, the world sort of shares a visual language. But I think it's really interesting the way that both in how you're describing it, but in your work, you really draw out like a specificity in the visual language, which really resonates. And I guess this is sort of a parallel comment, but I was reading as well in that interview that you gave about a joke that you have that in photojournalism, you can't see color, but in so much of your artistic practice, it's very colorful. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit about how you've maybe developed your own visual language and why you've made those choices.
I mean, I started out in the darkroom, so I am that generation that spent a great deal of time developing film, printing my own prints and so forth, both in black and white and color. I've always had an attachment to black and white photography because I realized it's hard to conceal the truth in black and white, whereas color, you can use your filters, you can use your saturation, and, it's easy to sort of mask certain things. But I've always been obsessed with light. I've always been obsessed with forms and shapes, all these things. I think it also has to do with my film education as well. But when I say that I can't see color, it's because I'm more focused not on what's easy to see, but what is more difficult to see. So in that way, the black and white offered me that space in order to focus more on the emotional aspects or the lighting aspect of capturing realities and moments. And going into color and with my fine artwork, I knew that I wasn't so strong in color photography. So I understood, okay, let me look at it almost like a painter, just to only focus on the primary colors and to develop my work from the primary colors. And that became sort of like an obsession because I realized that was the visual language. Those were the palettes that I enjoyed to work with. But again, it's also about, constructing the scenes, trying to, build collections that have meaning. And also the one thing I'm very clear about is also about authenticity. So within any form, my goal has always been to authentically present my thoughts, my ideas, and my experiences without having to pretend to be somebody else. So my work is really a reflection of who I am. And this is, I think, when we speak about art and creativity, that's the most important thing that we have to focus on. So I never really started doing that work for the sake of the market or what I thought would sell or what I thought would be interesting. It was just a way for me to express something that was very intimate and emotional to myself and to try to find the right way of expressing it. And that basically started with a curator, Simone Jami, and he was the one that really pushed me to get into this new form that people see me working in. And from that, I understood, okay, I finally found my visual language to say what I wanted to say and to say it the way that I felt was authentically me.
There's so much in that. But I think something that I really feel is a theme so far of the things that you've been describing is this way that you lay the foundations and you build up from that, and how you're describing maybe photography education, starting with documentary, starting with photojournalism and building up to an arts practice, or starting with the primary colors. And so I wonder, how does that translate into your thinking about ethics in visual media? How do you lay those foundations in terms of ethical practice in photography?
I mean, I think that the first priority, I believe, is education. I've taught in different parts of the world. And the one thing that I've noticed, in developed nations is that the education system is still quite archaic. It's just now that they're slowly coming to understand that there's actually a global view as it relates to photography and image creation. And within that, as more photographers are entering sort of these platforms and, producing work within the global South, there's more questions that's actually coming from the global South as it relates to ethics. And that means is that for us in the global South, we have to educate ourselves to do better than what's been done before. It's not just about representation, but it's talking about rights. So one of the key things, for example, in photojournalism is that if I come to Europe or I come to the US, I can't just take photos of children on the streets, but this is a very unethical thing. But for some reason, photographers come to Africa and feel that it's okay to take photos of kids on the street, which they would never do in their own country. So these kind of things can only change when we have a global discussion as it relates to the direction of photography that is not only led by the global North, but it also encompasses of the challenges that we face in the global South. So in that way, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So even in the workshops that we give, I'm very clear about giving them the list of ethics, as it relates to what is our role, what is our responsibility, and also to really understand that we are representing someone, something, a history, and so forth. So within that, we need to have a level of respect. So even for myself, when I was working as a photojournalist, traveling in different parts of Africa or traveling within my own country, there are those things that I was very, aware of, and to have a level of respect as well. So that's in the documentation aspect of it. Now, when we go into the copyright issues, when you look at things being utilized for other purposes or people, stealing your work, I mean, we still have a long way to go in that as well. And to me, it's the more conversations that we have with photographers outside of our regions, and this is not only speaking of us as Africans, but also those in different parts of the world, the more we can push sort of this agenda of, what is our rights as well as photographers. Right now, when you look at where photojournalism is and photography, because it's heavily saturated, it's very difficult to make a living through it. But these are sort of the conversations that we need to have as we sort of move forward. And then we have this whole thing with AI coming up as well. And these are the relevant things as it relates to not only our rights or the ethics that lays within us, but also how we're putting our camera forward, to represent people as well.
Absolutely. And I guess I wonder as well about what kinds of ethical considerations come into organizing a festival for you. What are the things that you think about, or how would one organize a photography festival or photo competition in an ethical way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is really, it's about what is the work, what is the story behind the work. I've reviewed a lot of work. I've been sitting on a lot of juries. I've seen work from around the world. And again, it's about authenticity. And for those of us who are professionals, we can read who is behind the camera just by looking at the images. We know when you're doing work that's solid. We know when you're doing work that's not real or set up, or, when things are skew the line between documentary and fine art. So in that sense, it's just, we have obviously a specific protocol. For me, for example, I'm the one that goes through all the submissions, and I do that round. And then often if I have questions, then I will ask. So for example, there was a photographer, had very interesting work, but I had like a hesitation because I knew the content. So I sent a message asking, were you actually there? It was basically a collage of images, putting fine art things on it, photoshopping. So I asked, are these your actual images or do they belong to somebody else? And he came back to me and he said, no, he got it from the internet. And I said, well, you do know that this is unethical. You cannot use somebody else's work without their permission. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And again, it's just about, the rights of each person. So I had to go back to the photographer, ask him to submit another body of work because we cannot exhibit this. So through these kind of things, we have to make sure to double check that the work belongs to that person. And that is quite an important element of it. And then as it relates to, for example, last edition, we exhibited AI. We were very clear that it was photography created through an AI platform. But, through experience, you can tell some of the issues that will come up. And a lot of it is about the rights. So, and then we have obviously a contractual process. So like any other festival, you sign a contract with us. We identify the images that are going to be exhibited. And then through that, you confirm, you sign. And, organizing a festival, it's not a simple process. I mean, we have the hang of it because, been doing it since like 2010. It's a very difficult journey. But the way that I build my festival, it's building a global community. Yes, the festival takes place in Africa, but the conversation is also global. And it's trying to create a meeting ground for photographers from all over the world, as opposed to like, Africa only being present once in a while in certain festivals, So this is what interests me because I think, and often photographers, all over the world, they think that they're the only ones that have problems, but we all have our challenges, which are very similar. So, and that's why I think it's important to have a meeting ground of photographers that normally would never meet anywhere else. And then to realize, oh, wow, we face the same challenges, even though the context might be slightly different.
Absolutely. And I know that you've lived a lot of different places in the world. So I'm sure that experience has really informed also that awareness of the importance of bringing people together from sort of all backgrounds and all walks of life.
No, definitely. I mean, I have the privilege of travel, but not because I come from any kind of family background. It's just, migrating to find a better place to live. And for my mother, it was very important that I get an education. So, but that really has helped me in understanding sort of the humanity of who we are as a global society, and also realizing the differences, the divisions, and also the misunderstandings. So from my body of work, I make work that obviously my heritage, my roots, and my culture are deeply in it, but I focus on having a global discourse through my work. And that means that anyone that sees the work, my ultimate goal is that they don't forget it. And that's what I push for.
I wonder, your work in a lot of ways responds to a lot of ethical challenges that have plagued sort of humanitarian photography or development photography or photojournalism in those sort of representation of issues like access to water. But I wonder as well, have you encountered any ethical dilemmas yourself in the creation of that work?
No, I mean, I don't encounter those kind of issues because I arrive prepared. Everything is organized. Everything is researched. I am creating that canvas. So whether I worked on the Water Aid project or the End Fund project relating to disease. So for example, neglected tropical disease, my thinking behind it when I accepted that commission was that often when we talk about disease in Africa, we're just numbers, or it's just, these poor Africans who are sick. But nobody really thinks about the emotional toll of disease, the societal impact, the judgment, the shame, or, being sort of outside of the community. And these are the things that I wanted to focus on. But the way I got access to that kind of information is I asked them to send me transcripts of interviews of people that had recovered or people that are going through recovery with these heavy, very difficult diseases that were easily preventable with like a pill, So in that sense, again, all the commissions that I do or any work that I do as it relates to advocacy, it first has to connect with my own reality. That's sort of the basis for me. And it has to have my interest first. I don't really do commissions, for the heck of it. I do it because I feel passionate about that topic. And so through that, my process is, research, reading, watching whatever information I can have. And then from that, I start with my sketches. So I make my sketch, we do color blocking, then making the outfits, making the background. So there's a whole process that goes into it. And then when we arrive to finally having, everything shot, then the post-production also has another layer to it. But as artists, we can only present our own truths. This is the key thing. And that truth means whatever is in front of us, how we're authentically reacting to it. It's dangerous when artists come with an answer. So for me, I'm just provoking the questions. And these are the things that I focus on, is the questioning part, and also my curiosity and the exploration of what I think about certain things. But within it, it's just to know more and to also get people who are viewing it to go on that journey with me as well, to be curious just as I am.
I think that there's something really interesting in that idea of authenticity as well, because it isn't just, from what I understand, it isn't just authenticity of, authentically your viewpoints or beliefs, but it's authenticity in response to knowledge and research. And it's based in understanding first, I guess, because I think there is a kind of authenticity that could be a ill-informed authenticity, but this is a very informed authenticity, which I think is a distinction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I always say, I have an allergy to academia. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes things can be too academic. And I feel I think sometimes there's a mistake of spending too much time in theory. And I was speaking to someone saying that, I asked him, what is the opposite of theory? And he said the opposite of theory is art, and we live in a time where the artists are the trusted ones, and I think there's the influence of the artist is quite strong. To me, it doesn't matter which medium you chose, whether it's visual or performing arts, but we do have that power because we are presenting something that's authentic to us. And then there's somebody receiving it on the other end. So that means that there's a power if there's a receiving end. So these things, we can sit here and talk about it, and there's different people, obviously, that have different opinions about it. But again, I stand by my opinions and I stand by the things that I think about. But this is not closing off and saying that, there's no openness to also learning more. And that's what I feel, is that artists need to be more curious, in my opinion, to explore outside of the comfort zone and to really see what is out there beyond just, their location or their race or whatever, whatever it is, but to really see what's happening around the world, because those things have an impact on a lot of decision-making as well, of how we perceive people and how we perceive places.
Absolutely. I think that what you said about, the power of artists, it is so important, because whatever we're putting out into the world, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It will be seen and interpreted and understood by someone in some way, whether we intend it or not. So I guess that makes me want to ask, how do you think about the impact of your work? What is your aim or goal, or how do you think about your responsibility toward impact?
In all honesty, I make work to, it's almost like a therapy for me, of things that I've had in my mind. And I've seen a lot of things. And through that, it's a way for me to release that out of my mind. But I always say that, what I find really fascinating, and the purpose of the onlooker is really, this is my personal encounter, obviously, is that I make a very conscious effort to make the work. But what I find the audience reading into is the subconscious part of me. And I find this quite fascinating. And especially, my favorite thing is when there's school groups that come to look at the work, or children are looking at the work, sometimes I'll get messages of what they see in it. And that's such the purest form of critique, in my opinion. To me, I don't really care what the market says or what the galleries say or anything like that, because at the end, it's this is what I feel passionate about and this is what I want to present. Now, I feel very blessed that I've had these opportunities and that there's an interest into my work. And through that, I find that, as artists or as those that are creating, we have to really come to a point to realize also, again, we're not here to be like a propaganda machine that's putting out work to say, all we can do is just present our views on it, and try to remove also the impartiality. I mean, when you look at photojournalism, there's supposed to be an impartial element to it. It's not supposed to be one-sided, So within that, that's why for me, like when I see a lot of work, like I'm really curious about the other side as well. But I often find that gets sort of blurred, somewhere, that it's only like sort of one agenda that gets pushed. So within it, it's just, obviously with my background, coming from Ethiopia, coming from Africa, all these things, that's just a statement in itself, But what I'm sharing is just what is emotionally within me. And if somebody receives it and reads into it, then great. If you don't, it's not a problem either, But it's very fascinating how people see something completely different, or it provokes people in a very different way, or it makes them uncomfortable because they just can't figure out what makes them uncomfortable, So these are fascinating things, but I'm making work really for myself of the things that I like, and the things that I want to say. And then if there's someone out there that appreciates it, then that's great too.
I think there's something also really interesting that you were saying there about sort of brought to light this tension, I think, between authenticity and impartiality, because both are valued in photojournalism, but they're kind of in contradiction, actually. You can't really be authentic about who you are and your positionality in relation to the story if you're also trying to sort of achieve this amorphous or intangible impartiality. I don't know. And how do you work with students or teach students who maybe are wanting to go into photojournalism professionally and work in an environment where there's an expectation of impartiality, when in reality, we're also trying to cultivate that awareness of our positionality and our subjectivity? How do you deal with that tension?
I mean, I think that no matter how you try to conceal, you can read in an image about authenticity. You definitely can read it, especially when we talk about photojournalism. I'll give you an example. Sometimes the things that I've observed of teaching in Africa is that a lot of the times, not all the time, but some of the times, photographers coming out of Africa are coming from the middle class, That middle class viewpoint is evident in what they choose to document. So I remember I was somewhere and all the students wanted to go and photograph the poor people in their city. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And that's when I realized it was like a point of positioning for them, And I said to them, there's so many fascinating things just outside of the doorstep of your house. You don't even need to go far. You don't need to get on an airplane. There's stories, there's intimate stories that just exist within your community. So within that, it's, within photojournalism, we are supposed to capture the reality. Within fine art, we have the opportunity to create reality. So there are these two differentiating aspects, but the reality is also what forms the creation of the reality. You understand? So there is that play that goes back and forth within it. But that one thing that binds us is, what are we trying to say? And is what we're trying to say authentically true to us? Whatever that you choose that you want to say. So, with the students, I always tell them, the first thing is I say, to learn the rules. But then after that, what I expect is that they break the rules. And this is sort of how we have to approach it. Because right now, you can open any media outlet, any of that, and you'll see sort of a one-sided approach to things. But what we need to be questioning is, like, what is the other side as well? And this is sort of the balance that needs to exist, and to really, to not be almost like a servant to the industry. You know what I'm saying? To be a servant to the market. That's the only way that we're going to change things. And this is what it comes down to. And that's why, like, the social media platforms are so important. Having networks is very important. Doing these kind of podcasts is important because we're not part of the mainstream. And it's really to try to show the world that there's also other viewpoints, that there's other perspectives. So the machine is still going to continue being the machine. It's going to still want to produce what it wants to produce. But eventually, those things that start as grassroots, those things that are sort of independent of all bigger systems, those are the things that are coming up because now we're connected more than ever, that we're able to have a conversation across the planet, which we're not really able to do in the past, to be able to have a real discourse about different thoughts and ideas. So in that sense, it takes a lot of work within it. But I try to encourage students not to box themselves in of thinking that I have to make work based on what the market is looking for, based on what the commission is and so forth. Me, I'm selected to do commissions, but I'm given the freedom to do what I want to do because they know what I'm capable in producing. So I'm not going to engage in something that I don't have that freedom to express what I really think about things. So whether the client agrees to it or not, they understand this is my artistic point of view. And these are sort of the agendas that, sometimes they're seeing things that they didn't think about. So that view is what I try to present. But I'm not going to mold myself into one languaging or however that they want me to fit in that space because I'm the wrong person for that. So this has been my approach from my end.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess, like you said, it's a very competitive environment. And I guess in some ways that can be quite difficult for people earlier in their career to sort of set these parameters or restrictions on what they do. But on the other hand, maybe that is also how people can set themselves apart by sort of sticking to their guns a wee bit and focusing on the things that matter and instead of sort of chasing the dominant trend. But yeah, it's a risk, I guess, in the current economy that we're in with this sort of freelancing and stuff in photojournalism.
But that's why it's like, you have to understand that, all of us, and I say this often, you do work for your stomach, which is to pay your rent and your bills and so forth. And you do work for your heart, and that's your legacy, Mm-hmm. And you have to get to a point where the work that you do for your stomach that feeds you needs to also support the work that you do for your heart. But eventually, you have to keep pushing and have a level of consistency and being very persistent to reach to a point that all you're doing is work for your heart. That's it. So to me, I was doing a lot of different types of work. As I said, like, I know there's photographers that say, I can't do commercial photography because, they say it's beneath me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? If it's paying your rent and it moves you to the next step, then you do that work. Me, I've done weddings, I've done like baby photos, I've done every category of photography I have done. But through all of that, I was always like pushing and experimenting and trying to figure out when do I get to that comfortable point, not financially comfort, but the comfortable point of like, finally, I found my style. And that's always the most difficult thing, I can teach you technical. That's very easy, we can finish technical, in a very short period of time. But the longest thing that it takes to develop is what is your style. That when someone looks at your work, they're like, oh, okay, that's Aida's work. That's the level that we have to aspire towards. But we have to find sort of where is our positioning within that. But that means is that it's not sitting in comfort or sitting in content, being content with what you're making. Now, if you're a wedding photographer and you're making your money, you're completely happy with that, and you don't want to go any further, that's great too. There's no problem, There's a place for everyone, but everyone needs to know what is their path and what is their road. And that can only come about from being true to yourself and being very curious and always wanting to learn. Like, I'm still learning. The reason I teach is because I learn from teaching, and I find many fascinating things from the students because they open up another world for me, you know what I'm saying? And I see it and I'm like, wow, this is very fascinating.
Definitely. I mean, I really also appreciated how you described in that submission that you got for the photo festival, the way that you used that artist collage as also an opportunity for learning. And I think that's really important that, we see all these things as opportunities for us to learn, but also to support others in learning and sort of having that vulnerability. I think it takes a degree of vulnerability to say, I don't know it all. None of us do, and to be open.
No, I'm the first one to say, like, I can only, with the students, I said, the only I can share with you is what I know, what's been given to me. If you have something to teach me, great. I'm more than open to learn new things. And I don't claim to be like the person with all this knowledge base. Sometimes I find it annoying, going to certain events and people are talking about this person and this philosophy. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, Or there'll be exhibitions that I go to that I don't understand any of the work. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I don't get it. How is this relevant, But I don't claim, I don't claim to know everything, and I'm still on a path of learning as well. I don't feel that I've reached the level that I want to reach in my mind. But within that, the great thing about organizing the festival is just it gives me a global opportunity to see work for so many young photographers all over the world. And this is what I find like so rewarding. And it's really exciting. Like when I see work that I'm like, wow, this is really dope. Like, I'm like, I love this work. So to get that feeling, it's an exciting part for me. I'm probably more excited than the photographers, but to me, it's just like, this is wonderful. But within that, it's just over time, it just comes down to like living a life of purpose. This is really what it is all about. Whatever style you choose, whatever you wanted to do, just make sure you live a life of purpose. And this is always my goal. This is sort of my contribution to my continent and what I can do. I'm only one person, so I can only do one thing. But everything that I do is with the hopes that then somebody else will carry on what I have started, and we continue in that way. So even that philosophy has to be embedded in. We live in a very individualistic world where it's all about, yourself and that's it. And no one is really thinking beyond themselves, and no one is having. I don't want to say no one, but just my impression is that, there's not enough empathy as well to really look beyond our own comfort zones. So within that, it's just, I think being a photographer, the most rewarding thing is that it opens you up to so many different experiences and so many realities, giving you access to different types of people and what have you. So that's enriching as a person.
I feel like everything you described there just now is very low ego, which is really refreshing, not only from someone who, is so big in the industry, but from someone in the photography industry. I think it can be a very individualistic and a very competitive environment. So I think I really appreciate your reflections on that.
But just to be clear, everybody, you need a level of ego. I think as those that we create, there's a level of ego in some degrees, and then there's also a level of narcissism as well. Some have it more, some have contained the monster, you know what I'm saying? So it's about control. It's not that it doesn't exist. I don't want you to give you the impression that I'm all zen and, all this stuff. That's not the reality. I do have my moments, but I think that you said an important thing earlier. It's about vulnerability. And this is the key thing. We have to be vulnerable to keep ourselves open to new experiences, new ideas, and really to see beyond whatever that we have created, the fences that we have created around ourselves. But I think as artists, it's a fulfilling life as long as you're really focusing on that authentic aspect of who you are within this creative world.
The last question that I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what does photography ethics mean to you?
For me, photography ethics is really, the basis of it is about respect in whatever form that you want to talk about it, however you want to look at it. And that respect comes from also having a common understanding that the ethics of photography is not different because the location has changed. We need to all be together on this. So if we're using the same tools, our approach are the same things, and we're fighting for the same things, I think that there needs to be a better understanding and there needs to be a global conversation as it relates to that the ethical rules are not different because one nation is more developed than another. So these are quite important points for me.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to share new insights about photography ethics with others. So if you heard something you liked, please share this podcast with someone who would appreciate it. You can also rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast is sponsored by Falmouth University, one of the UK's leading creative arts universities. In a world where images shape narratives, ethical photography has never been more important. At Falmouth University, the online photography MA helps you master your craft while exploring the responsibilities of visual storytelling. Learn from industry experts, challenge conventions, and develop work with integrity, all from almost anywhere in the world. Join a global community of photographers committed to making a difference. Search Falmouth online and book a call with a course advisor today. Join me next week when we hear from Santiago Lyon on trusting what we see.